12 armed men cornered the city's most feared crime boss in a blind alley. He was bleeding, out of bullets, and preparing to die. Then the heavy steel door of a bakery swung open. Out stepped a 300-pound woman, holding nothing but a Zippo lighter, ready to ignite hell. The rain in South Chicago didn't wash away the grime. It just made it slicker. Vincent Costello, the undisputed head of the Costello Syndicate, dragged his bleeding left leg down the suffocatingly narrow stretch of pavement behind 43rd Street. He was an apex predator who had just been lured into a trap. The sit-down at Carbone's steakhouse was supposed to be a peace treaty with the Foley crew. Instead, it was a slaughter. Vincent had barely made it out the kitchen exit, but his legendary luck had finally run dry. He hit a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, a dead end. Behind him, the splashing of heavy boots echoed off the brick walls. Shadows elongated under the flickering amber light of a broken street lamp, resolving into 12 figures, 12 men. At the front stood Declan Foley, a man whose ambition vastly outweighed his intellect, holding a suppressed Glock 19. "End of the line, Vinny," Declan sneered, the rain plastering his blonde hair to his forehead. The 11 men behind him fanned out, raising their weapons. The metallic clack of rounds being chambered sounded like a firing squad coming to order. Vincent leaned heavily against the cold brick, his tailored charcoal suit ruined, his breath coming in ragged, bloody wheezes. He had taken a grazing shot to the ribs and a clean through and through to the thigh. He had no weapon. His enforcers, Jimmy and Leo, were dead on the floor of the steakhouse. Vincent looked at the 12 barrels pointed at his chest. He didn't beg. A Costello didn't plead for his life in a garbage-strewn alley. He locked eyes with Declan, preparing to take the bullets, standing up. Then, the heavy, rusted steel door of O'Leary's Sweets and Breads violently swung open, slamming against the brick wall with a deafening clang. The 12 gunmen flinched, their weapons pivoting toward the sudden noise. Standing in the doorway was Beatrice Hayes. Bea was 34 years old, standing 5'9", and unapologetically fat. She weighed close to 300 pounds, her broad shoulders and wide hips taking up nearly the entire doorframe. She wore flour-dusted black cargo pants, a grease-stained white apron stretching over her large stomach, and heavy-duty, slip-resistant work boots. Her dark, frizzy hair was shoved into a messy bun, and deep purple bags hung under her eyes. She had just finished a grueling 14-hour double shift baking industrial quantities of sourdough and pastries. Her feet were screaming, her back was locked up, and all she wanted in the world was to smoke her cigarette in the damp night air before her long walk home. Instead, she stepped out to find an execution squad. Silence hung in the alley, heavy and suffocating. Declan Foley lowered his gun a fraction, staring at the imposing, heavy-set woman who had just interrupted his coup. "Get back inside, lady," Declan barked, his voice laced with lethal warning. "You didn't see nothing. Close the door before I drop you, too." Vincent watched her, his heart pounding. Run, he thought. Run, you poor woman. But Bea didn't run. She didn't scream. She just looked at the 12 men, then down at the ground between them, and let out a long, exhausted sigh that spoke of a lifetime of dealing with arrogant men. "You boys aren't from around this block, are you?" Bea's voice was surprisingly deep, steady, and cut through the sound of the pouring rain. She reached into her apron pocket with thick, flour-covered fingers and pulled out a dented, vintage brass Zippo lighter. I said get back inside, you fat sot cow, one of Declan's goons yelled, raising a shotgun. Bea didn't flinch. She just stared at the goon with a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance. I wouldn't pull that trigger if I were you, Slick, she said, flicking the lid of the Zippo open with a sharp, metallic clink. Because if you shoot me, I drop this. She struck the flint. A bright orange flame roared to life in the palm of her large hand, casting dancing shadows across her round face. Declan let out a harsh laugh. What are you going to do with that, sweetheart? Toast us? No, Bea said, her voice dropping an octave, dead serious. She pointed her chin toward the ground beneath the gunmen's feet. I'm going to blow you to kingdom come. The men instinctively looked down. The alley was slick with rain, but it wasn't just water reflecting the ambient light. A thick, iridescent sheen coated the asphalt, pooling around the heavy boots of Declan's crew. The smell hit them then, acrid, sharp, and chemical. It completely overpowered the scent of rain and garbage. The dry cleaner next door, Bea said loudly, her voice echoing in the confined space. Mr. Chen's underground storage tank ruptured 3 days ago. That's 50 gallons of pure, illegal, highly flammable petroleum-based dry cleaning solvent pooling around your ankles, mixing with the runoff from our grease traps. It's been giving me a migraine all week. Declan's face went pale. He suddenly realized the strong, suffocating smell of chemicals burning his nostrils. You fire a shot. The muzzle flash might not ignite it, Bea said, her thumb hovering over the flame, her eyes locked on Declan's. But if you shoot me, my hand opens. The lighter drops, and every single one of you burns alive in a 1,000-degree grease and chemical fire before you can even take a breath. Vincent stared at her, utterly mesmerized. She was magnificent. She stood there, a mountain of a woman, radiating a terrifying, immovable calm, holding 12 armed mobsters hostage with a $2 lighter and sheer audacity. You're bluffing, Declan spat, though he took a half-step backward, the soles of his boots squelching in the toxic puddle. You'd burn too. I'm standing on a raised concrete stoop, Bea stated flatly. You're standing in a chemical bath, and honestly, after the shift I just had, I really don't care if I catch some collateral heat. Now lower the guns or I drop the lighter. 3. Listen, crazy bitch. 2. Bea extended her arm over the puddle. Her hand was rock steady. Hold! Declan screamed to his men, his voice cracking with panic. Hold your fire! Don't shoot! Drop 'em! Bea commanded. Kick them into the puddle. Hesitantly, cursing under their breath, the men dropped their weapons into the chemical muck. You! Bea looked past the 12 men, locking eyes with the bleeding crime boss. Suit guy! Get your ass over here, now! Vincent didn't hesitate. Adrenaline masking the agony in his leg, he pushed off the wall and limped heavily through the puddle, giving Declan's crew a wide berth. As he reached the concrete stoop, Bea reached out with her free hand. Her grip was like a vice, shockingly strong. She hauled the 190-pound mobster over the threshold of the heavy steel door with a single, forceful pull. Have a terrible night, boys, Bea said. She tossed the lit Zippo squarely into the center of the alley. Whoosh! The alley erupted. A blinding wall of blue and orange fire roared to life with the sound of a jet engine, instantly vaporizing the rain. The 12 men screamed, scrambling over each other in sheer panic to escape the explosive heat rolling over their boots. Bea slammed the heavy steel door shut and threw the deadbolt just as the heat blasted against the metal. Vincent collapsed onto the flour-dusted concrete floor of the bakery's loading bay, gasping for air. The sound of muffled screaming and cursing echoed from the other side of the door. Bea didn't pause to celebrate. She snapped the Zippo closed. She hadn't thrown her vintage lighter, but a cheap plastic one she kept in her other pocket, and grabbed Vincent by the lapels of his ruined suit. "Up!" she grunted, hauling him to his feet. Her sheer mass and strength were the only things keeping him upright. "They'll realize the fire is contained in a minute, and they'll come through the front. We need to move." "My leg," Vincent rasped, his vision swimming. "Bullet, I see it. Lean on me." Bea slung his arm over her thick shoulders. Vincent was acutely aware of her size, the solid, unyielding strength of her frame. She smelled of yeast, vanilla, and sweat. She practically carried him through the labyrinthine basement of the bakery, weaving past towering sacks of flour and massive industrial mixers. She kicked open a service door that led into a dark, narrow stairwell. "Upstairs," Bea commanded, her breathing growing heavy from the exertion of carrying a grown man, but she never slowed down. "I live on the 3rd floor." "Why?" Vincent winced as a fresh wave of agony shot up his spine. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I hate Declan Foley," Bea replied curtly, half dragging him up the steps. "And you're bleeding all over my favorite floor, Matt. Shut up and climb." It took them 5 agonizing minutes to ascend 3 flights of stairs. By the time they reached the top, Bea was drenched in sweat, her face flushed red, her chest heaving as she fought for breath. Vincent was barely conscious. She unlocked the door to apartment 3B and shoved him inside, locking 3 separate deadbolts behind them. The apartment was small, but immaculately clean. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with thick volumes, and a cozy, oversized armchair sat in the corner. Bea dragged him into the bathroom and dropped him onto the tiles with a heavy thud. "Stay," she ordered. Vincent let out a dark chuckle despite the pain. "Not planning on running." Bea returned a minute later with a large plastic tackle box. She flipped it open to reveal a surprisingly comprehensive medical kit: sutures, hemostats, lidocaine, and vet wrap. She knelt beside him, her thick thighs pressing against his uninjured leg. She didn't look at him with awe, fear, or the usual deference the boss of the Costello family received. She looked at him like he was a stray dog she had found in the gutter. "I know who you are," Bea said, her hands moving deftly as she used a pair of heavy shears to cut away the expensive fabric of his suit pants. "Vincent Costello, the ghost of Southside." "You have an advantage, then." Vincent gritted his teeth as she poured raw alcohol over the wound. "I don't know my savior's name." "Beatrice Hayes," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. She probed the wound. "Bullet passed clean through the muscle, missed the artery by half an inch. You're lucky, Costello. I need to pack it and stitch the entry and exit." "You a doctor, Beatrice?" "Veterinary tech dropout. Too expensive. Now I bake bread and occasionally pull mobsters out of chemical fires." She looked him in the eye. Her eyes were a striking, piercing hazel. "Bite down on this." She shoved a rolled-up leather belt into his mouth. Vincent bit down hard as Bea went to work. Despite her large, thick fingers, her movements were incredibly precise and gentle. She worked quickly, her face close to his. He studied her. She wasn't conventionally attractive by the shallow standards of the women who usually hung on his arm. She was large, heavy-featured, and carried the physical toll of exhausting labor. Yet Vincent had never found a woman more mesmerizing. She exuded a raw, gravitational power. She was a survivor. After 20 minutes of agonizing work, Bear tied off the final suture and wrapped his thigh tightly in cohesive bandage. She rocked back onto her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, her breathing still slightly elevated. "There," she said, tossing the bloody gloves into a trash bin. "You'll live, assuming infection doesn't get you, or Foley doesn't find you." Vincent spat the belt out, his chest heaving. "Foley is a dead man. Once my men realize I'm missing, they'll tear the city apart. You saved my life, Beatrice. The Costello family honors its debts. Whatever you want. Money, protection, name it." Bea stood up slowly, her knees popping loudly in the quiet apartment. She walked over to the bathroom sink, washing her hands thoroughly. When she turned back to face him, the exhausted, annoyed Baker was gone. In her place was someone cold, calculating, and dangerously sharp. "I didn't save you because I'm a good Samaritan, Vincent," Bea said, leaning against the doorframe, her large frame blocking his only exit. "And I don't want your money." Vincent frowned, trying to sit up against the bathtub. "Then what do you want?" Bea crossed her thick arms over her chest. 3 years ago, a low-level enforcer named Tommy the Rat Sullivan borrowed 40 grand from your syndicate. When he couldn't pay, your people went to his house to collect. Tommy wasn't there, but his younger brother was. Vincent's blood ran cold. He knew the story. It was a messy collection that had ended in a tragedy he had personally reprimanded his captains for. "The brother was paralyzed," Bea continued, her voice trembling slightly, but her eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying fire. "A 22-year-old kid in a wheelchair for the rest of his life because Tommy owed you money. Tommy ran. Your men are still looking for him." "Beatrice," Vincent started, a sudden realization dawning on him. "Tommy Sullivan is my half-brother," Bea said, stepping closer, towering over him. "I've spent the last 3 years working double shifts, breaking my back to pay for my little brother's medical care while hiding Tommy from your hitmen. So no, Costello, I don't want a reward." She crouched down, her face inches from his, the smell of smoke and vanilla wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. "I saved your life," Bea whispered, her voice like steel. "You belong to me now. You're going to call off the hit on Tommy. You're going to pay for my little brother's medical bills for the rest of his life. And you're going to use your syndicate to crush Declan Foley, because Foley is the one who set Tommy up in the first place." Vincent Costello, the most terrifying man in Chicago, looked up at the fat, exhausted, magnificent Baker who had just claimed ownership of his soul. He couldn't help it. He smiled. "All right, Beatrice," Vincent said softly. "You have a deal." For 3 days, the most dangerous man in Chicago was held captive by a floral-patterned armchair and a woman who refused to be intimidated by him. Vincent Costello's recovery in apartment 3B was a masterclass in frustration and fascination. He was a man accustomed to luxury, surrounded by people who trembled when he cleared his throat. Here, he was just an inconvenience taking up space in Beatrice Hayes's meticulously organized, cramped living room. Bea didn't coddle him. She worked her grueling 14-hour shifts at O'Leary's Sweets and Breads, returning home smelling of yeast, powdered sugar, and deep fryer oil. She would strip off her heavy boots, her thick calves swollen from standing all day, and immediately tend to his wound with the clinical detachment of a mechanic fixing a carburetor. Yet Vincent couldn't take his eyes off her. In Vincent's world, women were ornamental. They were sharp-edged, starving things who existed to look beautiful draped over the arm of a made man. Bea was none of those things. She was 300 pounds of unapologetic, grounded reality. When she moved around the tiny kitchen, she took up space, her wide hips bumping the counters, her large breasts straining against her worn cotton t-shirts. There was a raw, earthy power in her heavy frame that Vincent found himself deeply, inexplicably drawn to. She didn't shrink herself to make men comfortable. She didn't giggle at his dark jokes. She just looked at him with those piercing hazel eyes and saw right through the expensive suits and the bloody reputation. On the third night, the fever broke, and the agonizing throb in Vincent's thigh subsided to a dull ache. He sat in the armchair, watching Bea sort through a stack of mail at her small dining table. The amber light from a cheap desk lamp cast harsh shadows over her exhausted face. Vincent watched her thick fingers trace the edge of an envelope. She let out a long, shuddering breath and rubbed her temples. "Bills?" Vincent asked, his voice rough. Bea jumped slightly, not realizing he was awake. She scowled, sweeping the envelopes into a messy pile. "None of your business, Costello. Go back to sleep." "I made you a promise, Beatrice. I told you I'd handle Tommy's medical debts. Let me see them." She hesitated, her jaw tight, before sliding a few pieces of paper across the table. Vincent leaned forward, wincing as his stitches pulled, and picked them up. They were past due notices from Northwestern Memorial Hospital and exorbitant out-of-pocket bills for specialized spinal rehabilitation at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab over on East Erie Street. The total was staggering. Over $80,000 in medical debt, accrued over 3 years of relentless, desperate care. "You've been carrying this by yourself?" Vincent asked, his voice softening. "Baking bread for minimum wage?" "I sell customized wedding cakes on the side," Bea said defensively, crossing her heavy arms over her chest. "And I don't need your pity. I just need you to call off your hit men so my brother can actually sit by a window without worrying about getting a bullet in his neck. Once you're gone, and Tommy's safe, we're square." Vincent looked at the bills, then up at the fierce, magnificent woman glaring at him. A strange, unfamiliar tightness gripped his chest. "I need a phone, Beatrice. A burner. And some clothes that aren't covered in my own blood." Bea nodded once. "I'll go to the corner store." An hour later, Vincent dialed a number he had memorized 2 decades ago. It was answered on the first ring. "Speak," a gravelly voice demanded. "Carmine," Vincent said smoothly. "It's me." There was a dead, stunned silence on the other end. Carmine Russo, Vincent's fiercely loyal underboss, let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Boss, Jesus Christ. We thought you were gone. Jimmy and Leo were dead at Carbona's, and the Foley crew vanished. We've been tearing the South Side apart." "Where are you?" "Safe," Vincent replied, his eyes drifting to Bea, who was aggressively scrubbing a cast-iron skillet in the sink. "Listen to me very carefully, Carmine. Declan Foley set the ambush. I want his entire operation dismantled by midnight. I want his capos bleeding, and I want Declan found." "Consider it done," Carmine growled. "Do you need an extraction?" "Not yet, but I need you to do 2 things for me immediately. First, pull the Sullivan file. Tommy the Rat Sullivan. The debt is forgiven, and the hit is permanently cancelled. If any of our guys so much as look at him, I'll personally remove their eyes. Sullivan, the low-level runner from 3 years ago." "Boss, why?" "Because I said so, Carmine," Vincent snapped, his tone brooking absolutely no argument. "Second, I need you to wire 100 grand to an account at Chase Bank. I'll text you the routing number." He hung up the phone and looked at Bea. She had stopped washing the skillet and was staring at him, her hands dripping with soapy water. "It's done," Vincent said softly. "Tommy is free." For the first time since he had met her, the hard, impenetrable armor around Beatrice Hayes cracked. Her heavy shoulders slumped, and she gripped the edge of the sink, letting out a choked, wet sob. She covered her face with her large hands, her whole body shaking as 3 years of crushing, suffocating terror finally evaporated. Vincent didn't think. He pushed himself up from the chair, ignoring the stabbing pain in his leg, and crossed the small kitchen. He wrapped his arms around her wide waist, pulling her heavy, trembling body against his chest. She was soft, warm, and smelled like vanilla. To his surprise, Bear didn't push him away. She leaned back against him, letting his solid presence anchor her as she cried. "I have to go, Beatrice," Vincent murmured into her messy hair. "My syndicate is vulnerable while I'm missing, but I will be back for you." She pulled away, wiping her nose with the back of her wrist, her armor slamming back into place. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Costello. Just go kill Foley." Vincent limped out the door that night, leaving the burner phone and a silence that felt entirely too loud in the apartment. Declan Foley was a dead man walking, and he knew it. The Costello syndicate had moved with terrifying speed, dismantling his operation in less than 24 hours. But Foley hadn't teethed in the alley. The chemical fire had caught the left side of his face, leaving behind a swollen, blistered mass of 3rd-degree burns. Hiding in a cheap motel out by O'Hare, popping stolen painkillers, Foley put the pieces together. The fat baker hadn't just stalled them. She had harbored Vincent Costello. If Foley was going down, he was taking Costello's savior with him. 2 days later, the oppressive Chicago humidity broke into a cold, biting drizzle. Bea parked her beat-up Honda Civic in the brutalist concrete parking garage beneath the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. Today was the day. Tommy was officially cleared from the syndicate's hit list, and she was going to push his wheelchair out the front doors and celebrate with deep dish pizza. "Hello, sweetheart." Bea froze. The voice echoed from behind a concrete pillar. Declan Foley stepped out into the dim fluorescent light, looking like a melted nightmare. He held a sawed-off shotgun, flanked by his last 3 heavily armed goons. Bea's blood turned to ice. She didn't have her lighter or a puddle of chemicals this time. "You cost me everything," Foley hissed, spittle flying as he racked the shotgun. The deafening clack echoed in the empty garage. "Costello tore my world apart because of you, so I'm gonna blow your stomach wide open, and then I'm going upstairs to throw your crippled brother out a window." Bea's heart hammered against her ribs, but she raised her chin, her broad shoulders squaring. "You're pathetic, Foley. You were pathetic in the alley, and you're pathetic now. Pull the trigger." Foley snarled, raising the barrel directly at her chest. "Scream." The deafening squeal of tires violently interrupted the quiet garage. 3 matte black Cadillac Escalades shattered the entry gate, roaring down the ramp at 50 miles an hour. They fishtailed aggressively, boxing in Foley and his men against the cold concrete walls. Before the SUVs had fully stopped, doors flew open. A dozen men in sharp suits poured out, moving with terrifying synchronized precision. Automatic weapons were raised, dotting Foley's chest with red laser sights. Carmine Russo stepped out of the lead vehicle, resting a submachine gun against his hip. "Drop 'em, Foley, or we cut you in half," and Foley's men immediately kicked their weapons away, falling to their knees in tears. Foley stood frozen, his shotgun trembling. The back door of the center Escalade opened. Vincent Costello stepped out. Dressed in an immaculate, custom-tailored charcoal Bryony suit, he leaned heavily on a silver-tipped mahogany cane. The ghost of Southside had returned. Vincent ignored Foley entirely, his dark eyes instantly finding Bea. Checking her over for injuries, his gaze softened with lethal relief when he saw she was unharmed. Slowly, the loud clack of his cane echoed as he walked toward Foley. "Vincent, please!" Foley begged, his voice cracking. Vincent gave Carmine a barely perceptible nod. Carmine torsammed the butt of his rifle into the back of Foley's knees. Foley collapsed with a scream before two men dragged him by his collar into the back of an SUV. They would never be seen in Chicago again. The garage fell dead silent, save for the hum of the idling engines. Vincent turned his attention back to Bea. She stood perfectly still, her knuckles white as she gripped her canvas bag. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pang of insecurity. Standing in the harsh lighting, wearing stained cargo pants and an oversized flannel shirt, she felt massive, clumsy, and entirely out of place next to the elegant billionaire crime boss. "I told you I'd handle it, Beatrice," Vincent said softly, closing the distance. "You cut it a little close, Costello," she managed to say, her voice shaking slightly. Vincent reached into his suit and pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope, holding it out to her. "What's this?" Bea asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "The deed to O'Leary's Sweets and Breads," Vincent replied evenly. "I bought the building this morning. The business, the equipment, everything. It's in your name. You don't bake for minimum wage anymore. There are also documents establishing a fully funded trust at Chase Bank for Tommy's medical care and living expenses for the rest of his life." Bea stared at the envelope, paralyzed. "Vincent, I can't take this. I didn't want your money." "You saved my life," Vincent said, pressing the envelope into her rough palm. "And you showed me what real loyalty looks like." He stepped closer, looking up into her hazel eyes. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who agree with me because they're terrified. Then I met a 300-pound baker who cornered my enemies with a Zippo lighter and told me to shut up. You are the most magnificent woman I have ever met." Bea let out a breathless laugh, her cheeks burning red. "Vincent, look at me. I'm fat. I'm exhausted. I smell like sourdough starter." "You look like a queen," Vincent corrected fiercely, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "And you smell like home. I'm taking you to dinner tonight at Carbone's." Bea looked at the terrifying mob boss, and a genuine, radiant smile finally broke across her face. "All right, Costello," she purred with newfound confidence. "But you're buying. I have a very big appetite." Vincent smiled back. "I'm counting on it. If you felt your heart pounding during this gritty Chicago Mafia romance and loved seeing a strong, fiercely protective, curvy heroine put a billionaire mob boss in his place, you are in the right spot. Don't forget to hit that like button. Share this incredible story of Beatrice and Vincent with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, real-life drama and unexpected romance. Drop a comment below. What would you do?